So somebody asked me to do a video on how to listen to nature. And I think I think the real question is how to listen, because I think frankly most of us don't listen very well most of the time, even to humans. And I'm thinking about, have you ever been in a situation where there's a group of people talking and somebody's telling a story, and then instead of actually listening to the story, you sort of glom on to one thing they say, and then you basically wait till they take a breath so that you can now tell your story. And that's not really listening. That's waiting for an opportunity to, to push your own agenda, which is fine. That happens sometimes, but it's not really listening. And I think about that with nature too, that the first step of listening to nature is to understand that nature has something to say. And if you don't presume it has anything to say, but instead presume that you're simply looking around for an excuse for you to pontificate, well, then you'll soon find an excuse to pontificate. But in terms of actually listening to nature, it's all very interesting. And I think about this first with, people have said, how do we do interspecies communication? They've asked me that question a lot. And I always think about first, has anybody ever had a dog or a cat, a friend who is a dog or a cat? And you know that you have communication with them all the time. If the food dish is empty, they might look at the food dish, look at you, look at the food dish, look at you, until you finally figure out what the deal is, or all sorts of circumstances that you have known. And there's a story I've told before that I just love, which is I'm at my mom's house, and my house is down there, and I used to have some dogs who were at mine, and they didn't come into my mom's house. And I would come up to see my mom, and then they would stay outside on the porch out there. And then when I would go home, they would get up and walk home with me. Or if I would go into town, they wouldn't even get off the porch. They wouldn't even sit up. They would just look at me and keep lying there. And it took me about a year to figure out, how do they know? I thought they were reading my mind. How do they know that I'm going into town and not going home? And then I suddenly, after a year, I realized what it is, which is if I have my car keys in my hand, I'm going into town. And so they don't need to bother to get up. If I'm going home, I don't have my car keys in my hand. And for me, that's the essence of communication, which is simply paying attention to detail. And it's the same with other non-humans and with nature in general. The first thing is, and recognizing they don't speak English, don't speak human, like how then do they communicate? How do they make their needs known? And it's going to be different depending on the different species. And there's a cosmic story. I mean, it doesn't always have to be cosmic, but there's a kind of a cosmic story that I love telling, which is soon after I moved here, I felt like, sort of a good Nazi. I'm a nice guy, but I'm still jackboot. I'm still an industrial human who is, one of the enemy to nature, because industrial civilization and most humans at this point have declared war on the natural world and are just destroying it. And I kept saying to the land, I want to help, and I would like throw food out, and I would give various offerings, and I still felt that the land was still wary, as anybody would be. But could I be projecting? I don't know. And then one day I was walking through the forest, or I walking down a path, and I saw some strange footprints. They were human footprints. They weren't mine. I recognized that the shoe was not my shoe. So somebody else has been there, and I see that they head off the path at some point. So I follow them, and I find this guy hiding in the forest. And I say, "What are you doing?" And he says, "Nothing." And I keep talking to him, and I find out that he's been cutting burls off the trees. And So I tell him that he can't cut the burls off the trees, and I escort him off the land. He comes back the next day, and I say the same thing again. You can't cut the trees. These trees are protected. You can't do this. And um, and then he didn't come back. And in the 3 days or so after that, I saw the biggest pile of bear poop I had seen to that time. I saw the biggest red-legged frog I've seen to that time. And I was walking through the forest, and a bird flew out of the underbrush and brushed my chest with its wing. And that felt to me like, well, the first paragraph of A Language Older Than Words is, there is a language older by far and deeper than words. It is a language of gesture, symbol, memory, dream. It's a language of metaphor. I'm kind of butchering it, but you get the idea. And, oh, it's a language of wind on snow, rain on tree, something like that. Anyway, the point is that that's how nature communicates. And ever since then, the forest has treated me differently, because I made clear, yes, I am actually going to help protect you. And I mean, since then, seeing a big pile of bear poop, I mean, for crying out loud, last night there were 4 bears sitting right out there, just hanging out. And so how do you have a communication? By opening yourself up to the understanding that they exist, and then waiting and talking and listening. And I think of something a lot that a friend of mine said about how you become friends with a pigeon. And the way you become friends with a pigeon or any bird is you stand there like this with food in your hand, and you don't move. And you just wait, and you just wait. And that's how you feed a wild animal, is that you stand there and you wait, and you give them something, you give them a gift. And then I want to say one more thing too, which is that I often have told the story of how I wrote, how I didn't write, how the most beautiful thing I've ever written is the Pretend You're a River part of Endgame, and I didn't actually write it. The way it was written was that I was wondering what I think is the most important question of all, which is, what is it like to be you? And that's the most important question in any relationship. And I was wondering what it's like to be a river. And I'm trying to write what it's like to be a river. And I'm stuck for several days. I can't get anywhere. And then I realized how stupid that is. Why should I try to write what it's like to be a river when I live 50 feet from a stream? Why would I write it? That'd be like me writing, what is it like to be a woman, when I can just ask a woman. Duh. So I walked down to the stream and I said, what is it like to be you? And just like that, the stream had been waiting for a human to ask that question, because the entire, several pages came to me instantly. I mean, the stream said it. And then I was like, what is it like to be you? I stood there for like 2 seconds. And then I said, thanks, ran into the house as fast as I could, and then just wrote everything that the stream had said. And that's it. And I didn't even edit it. It's just, that was it. And how do you learn how to listen to nature? By asking.